Are we truly experiencing a packaging revolution right now, or are we simply in an incremental mode?
Well, I definitely think we're in an interesting position right now because I think we're seeing more and more companies thinking about it, maybe even more than ever after the last year, where we were in single use mode. So, where maybe people were exploring it from a personal investment or a financial investment in the past, it feels harder to ignore at this moment. And I think we're seeing a lot of companies where we would have trickle in conversations for those different reasons. And now it feels impossible to ignore. And we're seeing such a wider influx where people are starting to consider it at a whole scale, consider it from end to end, like you mentioned, and just thinking about it much more broadly, bringing in a lot of new players maybe that weren't thinking about it before as well. Coming from a background in industrial design, my packaging experience was wide and vast, and it was something we thought about constantly. I think even, when I was in school, we were thinking about where a lot of packaging was going was into the trash. So maybe some of the things that we were designing. And so thinking about it, even at that early stage, and then moving into research and seeing consumers talking about it early on, and then moving further upstream in trends where we're working and seeing, if we're not working on this today, what is it going to look like tomorrow? Or to say, if we don't act now or look at the trends upstream, something that we want to implement tomorrow may actually be too late.
I spent a decade overseas in Asia doing contract manufacturing, specifically in molded fiber packaging. And through that work, I worked with a lot of CEOs and COOs of the major packaging companies around the world. One of the things that really stuck out to me was basically where this product ends up. We're in a situation now where compostable products are more popular than ever, but consumers are still they lack education, they lack awareness of what to do with these products. Here locally in Cincinnati, we're working with a lot of restaurants. Everyone is, I would say 90% of people are committed to making the switch to a eco-friendly alternative. But at the end of the day, almost all these products are still ending up in the landfill. And so, what we found as I launched this business here in Cincinnati is how do we create that basically that full cycle so that we can collect it. And so one of the initiatives that we've launched is as we deliver our compostable packaging to restaurants here, we also have started a program where we collect it after it's finished. So some of the products that we do are compostable clear cups that are used at breweries, compostable clamshells made from molded fiber. So the customer's using it in the shop, and then when they're done with it, they deposit it, and then we come by and we collect it as well. That's one of our initiatives. And the biggest gap was always we have these compostable products and almost none of them end up in the compost. And so that's really was the impetus to launch our company.
I grew up in South Africa, grew up in a mining and agriculture family, so really learned a lot about the first mile in the supply chain. Blockchains offer a secure way to, in a tamper-proof manner, in a mutable manner, capture information with its full history and then share the proof of that data without actually revealing the data itself. So you still get full autonomy about the actual information you're capturing, but at the same time, you can share the actual validation in a tamper-proof way every step as it goes through this journey, through this value chain.
I'm also an industrial designer, like Elise. Studied packaging. Well, I didn't study packaging, product design, right? So worked at what is now WestRock and Coca-Cola, designed a lot of plastic bottles. Went to Indonesia, saw the devastation of the plastic crisis kind of in full force there. Moved out of packaging design and I launched an incubator at Coke, and then I ran an accelerator that helped corporations and startups commercialize, and then got into microfinance and was able to sort of put together all of these things that I've sort of dabbled in or have domain expertise in to say I want to figure out a way to support founders with capital who are working in climate, specifically to address the plastic crisis.
It's just exponentially grown, maybe even in the last 6 months or so. I think it's harder to ignore maybe the signals, and also, like I said, harder to ignore maybe that, massive generation of single use. So people just thinking about it differently and thinking about that circular lifestyle a little bit more.
So when it makes it to us as a consumer, there's actually a QR code on the product that's specific to that batch, verifies the origin of that story, and it goes all the way back to the original farmer. So
recycling is is a solution at the moment. And there's a lot of investment going into recycling. But for me, I think the exciting thing would be how much more emphasis can we put on refillables, returnables, and compostables, and create the infrastructure for that. Invest actually more to sort of create this step change that could really accelerate the kind of addressing this big challenge that we face.
I think that a lot of times maybe it can seem like if we're going in a sustainable future and maybe removing packaging or changing substrate or some of these more tactical choices, that maybe we're losing some of that storytelling that we had in the past with packages. But I think it's not revolutionary to say that it could move to digital, but I think on the flip side, it could also be using that packaging in new ways. It can open new avenues to tell those stories and create a new experience for the consumer through the sustainable packaging that may be totally different from something they've experienced before.
There's a lot of technology and systems that can now, like smart cities or technology around sensors or even apps that are going to make those things that we used to know how to do pretty well actually work even better. And the technology that needs to be created on that end of the spectrum, how people engage with these things, all the way to more of the physical products that I think, and green chemistry and all those sorts of things that are going to need to be developed. There's tons and tons of opportunity.
It's something that we've really been discussing about how different companies are tackling this, and how they are being honest about the carbon and saying maybe they're using plastic because it's cheaper to ship plastic than to ship glass, or from a carbon perspective, it's less impactful. And I think that that's something that every company kind of has to weigh, and that transparency, like Kim was talking about earlier, of how those decisions are made and why they're made is really the key component.
For any claim to be widely trusted, it needs to be verified. Yes, storytelling is important, but verified stories. Like, we need proof and evidence that this is actually true. And it's not just a marketing gimmick so that you can put a premium on your product. The question is if you add that premium, is that money going back to the farmer? And can I see that? Can I actually, and it's not just about the storytelling from source to sale, it's actually interacting with that story. As a consumer, can I actually participate in giving back to this farmer? Can I tip the farmer? Can I actually give some financing? Could I actually participate in some of the insurance that might have to go back to these different industries that have to, where we're getting our products? So I think it's also that interaction piece of like how you get the consumer more to interact with the product, not just about the journey going from one side to the other side. It's also the opposite direction, is how do we get involved as consumers? And I think that's the other, like, talking about these like data-driven solutions, like until we don't truly track and validate what's going on, we're not going to be able to transact without just thinking that this might just be greenwashing or whitewashing or whatever you want to call it.
As we go out and we interact with restaurateurs here locally in Cincinnati, it's not really it's not a hard pitch. What's amazing is, we're here in Cincinnati, we're not on the West Coast, right? Which, traditionally this is just slightly less progressive than the West Coast. But the business owners and restaurateurs that we interact with, they're committed. What's amazing is there is a widespread awareness of the toxic pollution problem, plastic pollution, and people just at a fundamental level, they don't want to contribute to that. And as we say, like, you don't want to profit off of pollution. If you have a brewery and you're using thousands of plastic cups every day and they're being used for 20 minutes and then they go down the street to the Rumpke landfill to sit there for 100 years, is that the right way to build a business, to earn a living, to be a responsible steward of your community?
I think that the opportunity is that we can actually design products that are delightful and are going to help consumers get beyond this kind of guilt that a lot of people are feeling. And it's not, I think people are searching for things. So having products that are going to require like a lot of complexity or behavior change isn't necessarily the answer. I think that we have brilliant minds and companies with tons of resources that, when working together, can actually design something that's elegant and is actually, genuinely circular in execution, that's not going to confuse people. I mean, there are ways to do this that will help people kind of get over that. We're not going to, I think if we start putting solutions out that are making things more complicated and confusing for people, that's obviously going to fail. But I love that analogy. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Like, it's like when things start to look and taste and feel as good, perhaps better, that's where we're going to win. And I absolutely believe that that's possible.
So I think there is maybe still some education that needs to happen with consumers, but I think like as things grow and as that becomes an assumption rather than maybe a point of difference, people can start to understand the lowest level that they need to understand as a consumer. Like maybe I don't need to understand exactly how composting works, but I understand that I can compost it at home versus I can commercially compost it. And I think that's even something that, is maybe not always something that's understood by the general consumer today.
Part of what needs to happen first when you're imagining any kind of new solution is how can we get rid of the packaging? And that's why I love all of those types of things like bar shampoo, bite toothpaste, those solutions are elegant and they work. And I think more people that I know who I never thought would switch to something like that are starting to use those, recognizing the tremendous issue of all the plastic that they're using. I think what's missing is big retailers and CPGs, somebody, I think I mentioned this before, taking a huge leap forward and putting a stake in the ground and saying, we're getting rid of all single-use plastic, or we're putting refilleries in our outlets. Who knows? I think, or like all beverage companies, we're going to mostly refillables. This problem is urgent and massive. And I think there's technology that we have that we already know how to do that needs to be implemented, and people just need to start signaling and making big moves.